Chapter 13 is one of my favorites because although the title implies it's about just the delivery of the speech, it's actually mostly about nonverbal communication. I've actually included some couple extra things in here that are not in your textbook, so you'll want to look at this PowerPoint in its entirety to help you study for the next quiz. So first, nonverbal communication is obviously really important, and according to experts, a substantial portion of our communication is nonverbal. And they say there's varying statistics, but over 70% of the message is coming from the nonverbal. And every day we respond to thousands of nonverbal cues and behaviors, including postures, facial expression, eye gaze, gestures, tone of voice. All those things are nonverbal communication that we may not realize or think about. Nonverbal communication is our primary tool for communicating emotions. So let's dive into the chapter, first relating it to speeches and speech delivery. There are 4 ways of delivering a speech: manuscript, memorization, impromptu, and extemporaneous. You can say extemporaneously 3 times really fast. You get a prize. The first 2, manuscript and memorization, you have time before the speech to write it, develop it. Extemporaneous, you also, as you know, have time to develop the speech beforehand, because this is the type that we do primarily in this class. And what makes extemporaneous great is that it is, as you know, not memorized completely and not read completely from a piece of paper. So it's kind of a hybrid of the first 2. Extemporaneous is developed beforehand, and you write brief speaking notes. So you have something to rely on if your memory fails you while you're giving your speech, but you're not reading your whole speech word for word, which makes people tend to sound monotone and makes for a very boring speech. Also, extemporaneous, because it's brief speaking notes and because you're not reading your whole speech, you have good eye contact with the audience. And so you have the ability to really engage your audience. And key thing to note, one of the main benefits of extemporaneous speeches, it allows for a conversational tone, it's conversational style. It's kind of like you're having a conversation with the audience. Memorization, you memorize the whole speech, it's obvious. Impromptu is where you do not have prior preparation, you do not develop the speech beforehand, and you have limited to no speaking notes. So kind of like improv, you've heard of that in acting. You just think of something on the spot. So those are the 4 types of speeches, ways of delivering a speech, if you will. 4 principles of nonverbal communication. Nonverbal communication happens all the time whether we are aware of it or not. So it is both deliberate and unintentional. When's the last time you had a nonverbal communication that was deliberate? Maybe nodding your head to someone, waving hi, smiling, giving eye contact, talking to people. Those are all common deliberate nonverbal communications. Unintentional. When was the last time you were nervous? Maybe out on a date, giving a speech, and you did behaviors that were not intentional. Did anyone in your last speech say a lot? Did anyone have their hands shaking? Sweaty palms? Or maybe, if you're out on a date, it can be nerve-wracking to look someone in the eye, even. So maybe eye contact might be something that you kind of have a hard time looking right at the person. Maybe fidgeting with your necklace hair. You know, it's fun to think about these things that we're not aware of, and so then being aware of our nonverbal communication is really important, especially for things like job interviews. Even though you're nervous, you have to, good eye contact shows confidence, and I'm sure you know all the other things that you've probably hopefully heard about to do in a job interview. Good posture, things like that. The second principle, few signs have universal meaning around the world. Like this does not mean good job in all countries. It means the equivalent of putting up your middle finger in some countries. So gestures and signs, I don't know if you have traveled abroad, if you know any other gestures that they do that we don't know about. So yeah, you can't assume everywhere you go that gestures mean the same thing. Third principle, we trust nonverbals more. This is a big one. No matter what you're saying, if it contradicts what your nonverbals are saying, people will look at and trust your nonverbals. Ever get in a fight with someone and you don't want to talk to them and they say, "What's wrong?" Because you're kind of maybe giving them the silent treatment. And they say, "What's wrong?" And you say, "Nothing." So tone of voice, facial gestures will speak volumes. And you have to be careful of and aware of your nonverbals because people trust them more. Ever heard of the resting face, RBF, if you will? People who just kind of look naturally not pleasant and aren't sure why people are commonly misunderstanding or thinking that they're not approachable. Well, they are not aware of their facial gestures, their facial expressions. And so it's really important to be aware of that. Tone of voice, it's also speaks volumes. If someone were to say, "Oh, what do you do for a living?" and maybe you're in a scenario where people have asked you that a lot lately, and so you might just kind of say, "Oh, I'm a teacher." Well, that tone of voice lets people know. It's a little bit confusing, actually. They're not sure, does she not like being a teacher? Is she mad at me that am I asking her the wrong question? Is she, you know, we aren't sure. So just be careful. Everything from tone of voice, facial expressions, gestures. The last one is just a complex way of saying the person who's looking at your nonverbals, the precedence is what they are assuming what your nonverbals mean versus what you are meaning in them, because it doesn't matter what you mean unless you tell the person, which hence nonverbals meaning you're not telling them what you mean. So in the end, the person who's looking at your nonverbals are going to assume what they think it means, and that takes precedence over what you intend them to mean, because that's what goes, and then walk away with what their perception was, not with what you intended it to be, unless you tell them. Two types of nonverbal communication. There's actually more, but this is where I'm adding these two categories that the textbook doesn't have. Kinesics and paralanguage. Kinesics is everything related to the body action. So eye contact, posture, the way you walk, facial expression, gestures. Just kinesics, you can tell a lot about someone's communication. So if that's why they say in a job interview, if you want to appear confident and that you know what you're talking about, don't slouch over or look down and not have good eye contact. And this can be unintentional too. So maybe someone just broke up with their significant other or got a ticket on the way to work, or school or had a pet just die. You know, how you would be walking, lack of eye contact maybe with people in school, in the sidewalk on your way to work, would be unintentional, but it's telling people something. Paralanguage is everything related to the verbal part of nonverbals. So rate, how fast or slow you speak, volume, pitch, inflection. Whenever I ask my classes what inflection is, not many people seem to know. Inflection is just the change in pitch. So when we ask a question, inflection goes up at the end of every sentence. Hopefully you're not a Valley girl and have inflection after every single word. Articulation and pronunciation is also very important, especially when doing speeches. So all of these things can be confusing when you're communicating electronically via email or text message. I mean, even emojis can't really accurately portray what face-to-face nonverbals can. So that's why a lot of miscommunication happens, as I'm sure you have experienced in the past, not knowing exactly what someone meant by what they said, or maybe they seemed a little harsher than what they really meant in their email or text, and you just didn't have the background of being able to hear or see their voice or other nonverbals to tell if they were being sarcastic or not. So here is an interesting article that I found. How to tell if someone is lying. So nonverbal communication is used in forensics and in law enforcement to tell if people are lying. So this fun website says you can tell someone's lying to you by watching their face. Here are 12 dead giveaways. Just about everyone you know tells low-stakes lies, but some people even go as far as to lie about important matters that can forever change their relationships, employment, or send them to jail. Watch their eyes. Eyes darting back and forth. People's eyes usually dart back and forth when they feel uncomfortable. Maybe you have experienced or done this unintentionally. Rapid blinking. When people are stressed about lying, they may blink more frequently than not. Closing eyes for more than 1 second at a time. People often close their eyes for more than a second at a time when they're lying. Pay attention to the direction that they look. When you ask a normal right-handed person about something he's supposed to have seen, like if a policeman's saying, you know, eyewitness to a crime, if the person looks upward to the left, if they're right-handed, that means they're truly accessing a memory of the incident. But if they look upward to the right, if they're right-handed, that means he's accessing his imagination and inventing an answer. Same goes with left-handed people. They'll have the opposite reactions. Interesting. Looking directly to the right. If you ask a person what a person heard, so looking directly to the right related to the ears, his eyes will shift toward his left ear to recollect the sound that he did hear, but his eyes will shift towards the right if he's about to fib. Looking down to the right. Right-handed people often look down when they're down to the right, when they're lying about smells or sensations. So down, I guess, is related to smells or sensations. False smile. This is a common one that if you're good at reading people's nonverbals, you can usually tell when someone's false smiling. Yeah, I'd love to go out with you Friday. Face touching. People's faces often itch when they lie. Touching some face may indicate that they're lying. pursed lips. Kind of a sign people might be lying. Excessive sweating. Blushing. Head shaking. So yeah, those are just some fun ways. I don't know if any of you have watched some popular YouTube channels. I won't go into pull up this one, but it's here on the PowerPoint if you want to watch it. This particular link is the Logan Paul YouTube channel, a lie detector test. Kind of fun, a little bit silly, but in general, back to nonverbal communication and speeches. The book talks about ways to have effective speech delivery, well-paced, good eye contact, speaking clearly with articulation, not mumbling. Avoid using slang or jargon unless it's appropriate. Use gestures or other nonverbals when appropriate to emphasize a point. Characteristics of ineffective delivery. Little eye contact with the audience, excessive nervousness, fidgeting, monotonous or stiff reading or reading entirely from your speaking notes, speaking too fast or too softly, mumbling words, not speaking loud enough. I should change this from too many mispronunciations to any mispronunciations. If you don't know how to pronounce a word, look it up before you do your speech. It makes you sound very uncredible. Too many pauses like likes or ums. I know this is common, and this is something, if you have noticed so far that you've had a lot of ums or likes in your speech, it's okay. It might just be something you need to try to work on for the future. We talked, well, in my on-ground classes throughout the semester, I talk about good ways to practice your speech. In the very beginning, going through your formal full sentence outline out loud and kind of using that, going through that a few times to put it to the side without looking and reading your speech, or excuse me, practicing your speech, and then deciding, oh, what things do I need to write down on my speaking note cards based on what can I not remember from my outline when I put it down and try to do my speech from memory. So that's a good way to decide what you want to put in your note cards. Remember, note cards are just brief phrases, keywords and phrases, not full sentences. Practice out loud with your note cards, and there is something about practicing your speech to another person. It's great to read it through yourself, maybe in the mirror too, but there is nothing, no substitute for practicing your speech to another person. Everyone has agreed with me after they've tried it. So if you can, hopefully, just practice your speech at least once to another person. If you have visual aids, do a dress rehearsal with, practice your speech with the visual aids. Let's see if you can tell me what is wrong with this speech. Hopefully you will not do this.
Johnson. I'm going to be talking about the different areas in the marketing industry. So the first area that I want to talk about is the direct marketer, which is like a position usually in a company such as Sony or Nike. For example, they'll have like a product manager who wants to create a concept of the product that they're trying to sell. Usually, however, the product manager won't be able to create the concept completely by themselves, so they usually have to outsource to an advertising agency. And then the advertising agency comes up with the actual concepts for the advertisement, to be put on TV and like a commercial or something like that.
Okay, I won't torture you with 7 minutes of that. So what are some things that she was doing that made for a bad delivery? Fidgeting, saying a lot, reading too much from her notes, so little eye contact, and therefore she was sounding monotone. Yeah, so in general, you wouldn't think that she seemed like she knew what she was talking about or that she was well prepared. Here is a couple funny things. like to show my students in this unit. The Big Bang Theory.
The Black Panther lives.
There are moments that define a generation.
Commercial, sorry.
Hello, I'm Dr. Sheldon Cooper. Welcome to Sheldon Cooper Presents Fun with Flags. Fun with Flags is not just for the flag aficionado, it's also for the flag novice. So to help me with that, please welcome my friend, neighbor, and flag virgin, yet not a real virgin, Penny.
Hello.
So Penny, I understand you would like to learn more about flags.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many times I've been at a party where everyone's talking about flags and I just couldn't join in.
Well, you came to the right place.
I'm sorry, can we just pause for a minute?
What's wrong?
I just think it might look more natural if you talk to me instead of the camera. You know, like a real conversation. Something we work on in my acting class.
Interesting. A few people in the comments section have said that my delivery is robotic. Perhaps that isn't the compliment it sounds like.
Yeah, let's try it again. And maybe this time you could work on your body language a bit. You know, when you're all hunched like that, you're shutting the audience out. But when you're relaxed and open, you're inviting them in.
Right. And which one do I want?
Let's try open.
Our friend the Flags taught me anything, it's to go where the wind takes you. As long as you remain firmly attached to a rigid pole.
And this is a fun little thing for anyone interested in reading a woman's body language related to dating advice.
First asked for her number. What was her facial expression? Was it this? Yeah.
Or was it like this?
Yeah. When you put your arm around her or try to touch her or hold her hand, does she do this?
Hey, Stace, how you doing?
Oh, hi.
Hey.
Sorry, ticklish.
Or does she do this? Hey, Stacy, how you
Oh,
doing?
hey. I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Aw.
If you try to talk to her, does she do this? It's like a pimps and hoes party. Have you ever heard of that?
Yeah.
And there's like pimps and people. I mean, I'm not like, obviously it's not real, but you know, I'm probably gonna be the pimp, and then I gotta bring someone else to be the hoe. You know what I mean? So I mean, it's Saturday night, which have you ever been to Beaker Street?
Oh, I'm busy Saturday. Sorry.
Or this? So we're gonna have this like pirates and mermaids party.
Oh, shut up.
Yeah, and the guy's gonna be a pirate. It's not real or anything.
Are you gonna be a pirate?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna be a pirate, and I'm probably gonna do the peg leg thing, because yeah.
So funny.
It is.
Yeah, peg legs are hilarious.
Okay.
If you try to go in for the kiss at the end of the night, does she do this? Or is it more like this?
Okay, guys. So it just comes down to paying close attention to these signals that we told you about.
Hey, girl. Can I?
All right, another example. 322.
Around about body language, what it means, and a little bit about how it's applicable in our daily lives.
Sure. So
This is just a podcast, so it's just audio.
what we don't realize is that when we're thinking about communication, we often focus on the words we use. So what we want to say when we're going into a job interview or we're going on a date. We think about what we want to tell them, what our verbal answers should be. And most of school and education is focused on verbal, right? We learn a lot about language communication, written communication, the words we use. However, there's a huge amount of our communication that is behind the words. It's with our face, our voice tone, and our body. Somewhere between 60 and 93% of our communication is nonverbal. And that's a kind of a big range, but the most important thing to know is that it's the majority. The majority of our communication is nonverbal. And you know this, like, for example, we're on a podcast right now, so we're just doing audio. But if I were to say, oh yeah, she's a really great girl, you would know, even just from my voice tone, right? Like, you don't believe a word that I'm saying, right? What you believe is the tone that I'm using. And so we don't realize how much impact our nonverbal is having on our messaging. And so that's, I think, the importance of nonverbal, the sort of basics that if you haven't given your nonverbal much thought, it's super important for how you deliver your messaging.
Absolutely. You know, I have to admit, when I started learning about body language, I found it actually freaky how dramatically I could change people's perceptions and reactions with really, really basic modifications.
They're very small. It's not like we're talking about, a complete makeover. They're very, very small things that have huge impact.
So what are some of those small things?
So I think that the biggest one is being congruent. So I really don't like it when people talk about body language for manipulation or body language for like tricking people. I think that doesn't work for a number of reasons. First of all, it's not very ethical. Okay, basically, I don't like the way that feels. But most importantly, it actually doesn't work very well. And what I mean by that is the most powerful nonverbal highlights your words or your feelings. So when you are speaking, you want to make sure that your body is in alignment with your words. So for example, I see this all the time in elevator pitches, and I want you to think about your elevator pitch. Your elevator pitch is the answer that you give when someone says, so what do you do? So I want you to think about that answer for just a second. And you've probably said that answer a million times, right? You have it so down pat, so memorized. And if you like what you do, that can, even the fact that you've said it a million times can actually sap the joy and energy out of what you actually do. And if you don't like what you do, that can often leak out with your nonverbal. So I'll be asking someone, so what do you do? And they'll say, oh, I'm a kindergarten teacher. Kind of like side. And I can't tell, do they hate being a kindergarten teacher? Because it sure sounds like they're very tired of it. Are they tired of answering that question? Are they re-evaluating whether or not they should be a kindergarten teacher? I don't know, because her nonverbal doesn't match or doesn't give us any additional information to her words. So the most basic thing I can tell you is when you're thinking about your elevator pitch, how can you add emotionality into your pitch? So how can you add a voice tone or a hand movement that's going to help add to how you truly feel about what it is you do? And I hope that you love what you do. If you don't love what you do, then we got to work on that too. But hopefully you love what you do. And I don't want you to get sucked into the saying it so many times the same way.
Right. And suddenly actually wishing that we did a video podcast. But
I know. But you know what? It's helpful to do for audio because so many of us do phone calls in business, especially, right? We're doing audio conferences, we're Skype audioing, and we forget that we have a lot of nonverbal communication that comes through our voice tone. So if you were to ask me what I did and I were to say, oh, I'm Vanessa, I run a human behavior research lab in Portland, Oregon. Like, it's kind of interesting, but you're like, forgettable. Why? Because I said it 1,000 times. I didn't add any emphasis or tonality. Whereas if, let's say that I add some warmth to that. So warmth comes through in your voice when you change the emphasis of your words. You can also add engagement by changing your facial expression. So I'm going to change my facial expressions, even though you can't see me. That's still going to come through my voice. So I'll try it again. If I say, my name is Vanessa, I run a human behavior research lab in Portland, Oregon. So I actually opened up my face that time by smiling and also raising my eyebrows. And that actually comes through in my voice tone. It actually opens up my voice tone. So I actually like, the audio side is interesting because we forget how much our face and our body changes the way that we sound.
And I thought that was really interesting because when I had a job interview, as like what she said, they often are now, especially the first round of interviews, phone interview. And so the hiring person said that the person who ended up getting the job, one of the main reasons was she could tell that she was smiling behind the phone. So I thought that was a really important, pertinent, applicable. This body language video is a long one, so I will just let you watch it on your own. It's really interesting though. Kind of talks about the history of body language. All right. To deliver a good speech, you need confidence. This video is it's a TED Talk, and I'll let you also watch this on your own, but I highly recommend it. It's really inspiring. This guy, it's a soccer coach of a university who said the only way to gain confidence is by practice. And so you're not going to be confident if you don't know what you're doing, and so in order to combat that, just practice. And so really the more you speak for public speaking, the more confidence you're going to get with anything, really. So that was just a neat, inspiring message that relates to public speaking as well as other things in life. So, to review, we've got the 4 types of ways of delivering a speech: manuscript, memory, impromptu, and extemporaneous. We've got the 4 principles of nonverbal communication, and the 2 different categories of types of nonverbal communication: kinesics and paralanguage. So hope you enjoyed that chapter in those video clips, and I look forward to seeing you again in the next chapter.